Some homes don't need to do anything to feel haunted. They don't need flickering lights or whispers in the walls. Sometimes it's the silence, the stillness, the feeling that you're not alone, even when you know you are. Welcome to Paranormal Nightshift, where the shadows talk back and your true stories become part of something deeper, stranger, and harder to explain. I'm Andy, your guide for tonight. Before we get into this eerie listener-submitted story, I want to make sure you're not missing the bigger mystery we've been unraveling. Head over to paranormalnightshift.com to grab your free copy of The Birth of Dimensional Desperado, our time-bending ebook that kicks off Buck Shadow Sheriff Freeman's wild adventures into the haunted corners of the past. It's free, it's weird, and it's worth it. Now, tonight's story comes from Trisha. And if you've ever moved into a home thinking it was a fresh start, only to realize something else was already living there, this one's for you. When I first met the man who's now my husband, we both came into the relationship with kids. Me with 2, him with 1. It wasn't some picture-perfect beginning. We were trying to blend lives, routines, and 3 small, loud humans into something that resembled a family. At first, we moved into a modest apartment. It wasn't ideal, only 2 bedrooms, so we did what a lot of parents do in a pinch. We got creative. The dining area became a makeshift bedroom for the boys, sectioned off just enough to give the illusion of privacy. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Barely. Not long after, we got engaged, and that was our cue to find something better, something more permanent, something with walls. We lucked out, honestly. The house we found for rent was beautiful, an older home built in the 1950s with charm for days. It had this sunken family room and a step-up living room separated by a double-sided brick fireplace. Real wood floors throughout, the kind that moan and creak with every step like they're carrying their own memory of the past. Our room was down the hall to the left. The bathroom was straight ahead. The boys' room was across from ours, and our daughter's room was just to the right of theirs. The layout made sense, and despite the humidity warping the boys' doorframe to the point that it never really shut without a shoulder shove, it felt like home, until it didn't. The first time it happened, my fiance was out of town for work. I'd put the kids to bed, watched a little TV, and then turned everything off and headed to our room for the night. I remember how quiet the house was, how every creak in the wood felt louder without him there. I had just laid down, the mattress barely had time to adjust to my weight when I heard it. Footsteps, deliberate, steady, coming down the hall, straight toward the bedroom door. I sat up, my heart already racing, waiting for the soft knock I assumed was coming. Maybe one of the boys had a nightmare. Maybe my daughter needed a drink of water. But nothing came. No knock, no voice. After a few seconds of silence, I got out of bed and opened the door. But the hallway was empty. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. I slowly opened the boys' door. They were both sound asleep, one of them snoring softly, tangled in his blanket. I peeked into my daughter's room next. She was out cold too, her nightlight glowing softly against the wall. I stood there for a second, trying to convince myself it had just been the old floorboards settling or some trick of acoustics. But I know what footsteps sound like. That wasn't a creak. That was someone walking. Still, I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I went back to bed, pulled the covers up, and willed myself to sleep. When my fiance got home, I told him about it. He half laughed, half dismissed it, saying I must have been dreaming. Maybe I was in that weird in-between place of sleep and wakefulness. I told him I hadn't even had the chance to fall asleep. I was awake, but he wouldn't budge. That was until it happened to him. About a month later, I was working a closing shift at the restaurant. I usually didn't get home until after 1 a.m. He had to be up early, so he went to bed before I got home. The next morning, while we were pouring coffee and trying to piece together enough energy to parent, he said, "Okay, something weird happened last night." I looked at him, curious. "What kind of weird?" He hesitated, like he didn't want to give it power by saying it out loud. I heard footsteps coming down the hall. I thought one of the kids was going to knock, but they didn't. I checked. All of them were asleep. He just stared at me for a minute after that. It was exactly like you said. So now we both knew. We weren't imagining it. A few weeks later, something strange happened while I was at work. I had a table, a woman, probably in her 40s, who paid with a credit card that caught my eye. The business name printed on it had the same last name as some of the mail we'd been receiving at the rental house. I remembered the landlord telling us that the previous tenant had used the back building for her business. So on impulse, I asked, "Hey, did you ever live on Sand Hill Street?" She looked at me, startled. Yeah. "Did you ever live in the White House? Near the corner?" I asked. She stared at me, wide-eyed. "How do you know that?" I explained the mail, the business name, and then said, "I don't want to freak you out, but did anything strange ever happen there?" She paused. Her expression softened, but her eyes darkened with something like exhaustion. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's why we left." She went on to tell me that about a year before we moved in, her husband had died of a heart attack in the garage. After that, strange things started happening. Things she said she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. It got to the point where she and her kids didn't feel safe. He wouldn't leave them alone. I asked what she meant by that. She said he just wouldn't go. I know it sounds crazy, but if you ever feel him around, just talk to him. Put out a glass of water at night. Sometimes he'll drink it. I thanked her, not really knowing what else to say. Fast forward a few months. By then, my fiance was my husband, and we had bought our first home together just a couple miles away. After we moved everything out of the rental house, he went back one afternoon to take pictures for our security deposit. He photographed the light fixture we'd replaced, the walls, the floors, just normal stuff. Then he stood in our old bedroom doorway and took a picture down the hallway toward the boys' room. Then he turned, stood at their doorway, and took a shot facing back toward our bedroom. That's when it happened. As he stood there, back to the boys' room door, the door behind him, the same one that never shut on its own the entire time we lived there, slammed shut. Hard. He didn't bother finishing the photos. He left the house immediately. We never went back. And even though we live in a new home now, one we picked, one that feels safe, sometimes when the house is quiet and the night feels just a little too still, I think about the footsteps, about the old creaking floors, about a man who may have loved his family too much to leave. And I wonder if somewhere he's still walking that hallway, waiting for someone to open the door. And just like that, another story finds its place in the dark. Trisha, thank you for pulling back the curtain and letting us walk that hallway with you. Your courage to share is what keeps this show alive, literally and figuratively. If you felt something during this episode, maybe a chill, maybe a memory, help us keep that energy going. You can support Paranormal Nightshift by joining us on Patreon, where you'll get ad-free episodes, early access, and exclusive stories that never make it to the main feed. It's a way to support what we do and keep the strange stories flowing. Not quite ready to join? That's okay. Just hit subscribe on Spotify or YouTube and drop a comment. Seriously, your feedback fuels this project more than you know. And hey, if you have a story, a moment you can't explain, a presence that never really left, don't keep it to yourself. Go to paranormalnightshift.com and submit your experience. One listener's quiet nightmare might be the next story we bring to life. Until next time, stay curious. Stay brave, and if you ever hear footsteps in an empty hallway, maybe don't open the door. You've been listening to Paranormal Nightshift. And the night, it's only just beginning.